So here we have the text structure and purpose questions from the advanced portion of the Khan Academy's website. And reminder, all Khan Academy content is available for free at khanacademy.org. And all I've done here is to compile the questions into a PDF, link below, and that will also include a link to the answer key. But we'll go ahead and get started here with number 1. And it asks for the overall structure of the text. So even though it's a poem, we're not going to worry about that so much. We're just going to try to pay attention to the overall structure and kind of make note of that as we go before looking at the answer choices. So the earth's entail. No matter how we cultivate the land, taming the forest and the prairie free, the free prairie, no matter how we irrigate the sand, making the desert blossom at command. Okay, so like no matter how hard they try to tame nature, we must always leave the borders of the sea, the immeasurable reaches of the windy, wave-wet beaches, the million-mile-long margin of the sea. Okay, so something like no matter how hard they try, there is something about nature that's maybe a little bit too big or too overwhelming, too immeasurable, as it says here. So the overall structure. Yeah, so rather than actually writing down a summary, I'm just going to go to the answer choices. But again, we did sort of, make note of what was going on. So like no matter, I guess I'm not even talking about the structure so much here as the idea, but no matter how hard we try, nature is sort of bigger than us. And I realize that's terrible grammar, that's terrible writing, but let's see how far that gets us. Okay, the speaker provides examples of an admirable way of approaching nature. Nope, there's nothing about an admirable way. And then as we look farther into that answer choice, it's nothing really about challenging an approach. Attempts to control nature, and then a reminder that not all nature is controllable. Okay, so yes. And so that's an example of how sometimes you get something down and you realize this is not very well written, this is not very eloquent. It can still lead you to the correct answer, because no matter how hard we try in our attempts to control nature, nature is bigger than us. Not all nature is controllable. So the answer choice definitely says it a lot better than I did up there, but it's the basic idea. C, the speaker does not argue against interfering with nature. And D, the speaker doesn't present. Yeah, D, the first part is going a little bit too strong. It's not really dominating nature, but then even if we were to grant the first part, it's not talking about things being just temporary. Yes, so it's going to be B. And another one asking about the overall structure. So works of moral philosophy such as Plato's Republic or Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics are partly concerned with how to live a morally good life. But this philosopher argues that works that present a method of living such a life without also supplying a motive are inherently useful. So sort of inherently useful means that they have an sort of built-in use only to those who are already wishing to be morally good. Those with no desire for moral goodness will not choose to follow their rules. Okay, so that's kind of a critique offered by this philosopher. However, some works of moral philosophy attempt to describe what constitutes a morally good life while also proposing reasons for living one. So I would say this is a solution per se, but it's a solution. It's a solution that it's offered by at least some works. Maybe not like that. It's not as if they're trying to solve. They're responding directly to him, but they do the kind of thing that is not done by these other works that he is critiquing. Okay, whew, mouthful there. So it mentions 2 renowned works and then claims that despite their no, it's not popularity. And then impossible is an extreme word that would make us, should make us wary of that answer choice as well. B, it summarizes the history of a field. No. It's not summarizing the history of a field. It's mentioning 2 works that might be part of that history, but it's not summarizing it. And it's not saying that one is more widely read than the other, let alone explaining why. A characterization about a field by noting 2 works in it, and then details a way in which some works in that field are more comprehensive than others. Yes, some works are more comprehensive in the sense that they do 2 things instead of just one. They talk about the motive in addition to just the method, and so that one is going to be D. And once again, the overall structure. According to so-and-so, the Eurocentric concepts that informed, that fed into early 20th century social scientific methods, for example, the idea that all social relations are reducible or can be understood in terms of struggles between individuals, these methods had little relevance for India. Okay, according to this Indian economist and sociologist. Okay, so that's a critique or criticism. Making the social sciences more responsive to Indians' needs, Mukherjee argued this is a complex sentence structure. Making the process of making the social sciences more responsive would require constructing or creating analytical categories, ways to analyze things or break things down, informed by India's cultural and ecological circumstances. Okay, so here I'm going to again say something like a critique and a solution, but in this case, the critique and the solution are offered by the same person. He proposed the communalist Indian village as the ideal model on which to base. Okay, so he notes a critique with these Eurocentric concepts, and then he offers a partial solution that focuses on more India-centric ideas. So it does not talk about his early training. Nope, it doesn't talk about how a theory was more important than others have acknowledged. Critique and then address the issues. Yes. So I think more so than the previous ones, this illustrates how a couple of words can lead you to the right answer. His critique and then his attempts to address the issues identified in the critique. Well, that is to provide a solution. Yeah, it's not talking about their impact on other Indian social scientists. And once again, the overall structure of the text. Mathematician Claude Shannon is widely regarded as a foundational figure in information theory. His most important paper, A Mathematical Theory of Communication, published in 1948 when he was employed at Bell Labs, utilized a concept called a binary digit, shortened to bit, to measure the amount of information in any signal and determine the fastest rate at which information could be transmitted while still being readily decipherable. Okay, so that's a pretty long sentence, but basically, it's giving an example of his importance or an important work. Robert Gallagher, one of Shannon's colleagues, said that the bit was his discovery, and from it, the whole communications revolution has sprung. So, this is basically explaining, why Shannon is important. So it introduces a respected researcher, describes an aspect of his work, and suggests why the work is historically significant. Could not have said it better myself, but let's check the others. B, it names the company. No, it's focusing too much on the company there. C is not mentioning the figure himself. It's just mentioning the paper. And that's focusing too much on the idea of the bit as opposed to the person who proposed the idea of the bit. Yes. And so that is, yes, it's going to be A. I'm not sure I would count that one as difficult, although maybe, or advanced, except that, the sentence structure itself is somewhat challenging to, in terms of a reading comprehension component. So maybe that's why they have this in the advanced portion. Okay, here we are on to the purpose. So structure, purpose. Okay, so a little bit different kind of question. So what is it trying to do, not how is it structured? So space scientists so-and-so and such planted seeds of Arabidopsis thaliana in samples of lunar regolith, the surface material of the moon, and serving as a control group in terrestrial soil. So, a little diagram. So, control group. So, what's the other one that's not the control group? The experimental group. And lunar regolith. I'm just going to say moon and then Earth. No, not to say that's the whole planet, and that's the whole planet, but moon soil, moon surface material, and Earth surface material. Okay, they found that while all the seeds germinated or sprouted, the roots of the regolith-grown plants were stunted compared with those in the control group. Okay, so stunted, so not, they didn't fully grow. Their growth was stunted. Their growth was curtailed, shortened, something like that. Moreover, unlike the plants in the control group, the regolith-grown plants exhibited red pigmentation, reduced leaf size, and inhibited growth rates. Indicators of stress that were corroborated or strengthened, additional support was found for these indicators by post-harvest molecular analysis. So basically what they're doing is they're comparing results of growing plants in lunar versus terrestrial soil. Okay, so it discusses the findings of a study that evaluated the effects of exposing a plant species to lunar soil conditions. So another one where A is pretty good. But let's check the others. It presents evidence in support of nope, there's no hypothesis. And then unattainable is an extreme. And we want to be wary of those extreme words. C, it describes an experiment that dressed in... Nope, there's no question. At least nothing in the text that's either a question or a hypothesis. And then they're not using two methods of assessing indicators of stress. I mean, there are multiple indicators of stress, but they're not comparing different methods of assessing indicators of stress, if that makes any sense. Really, the big idea, again, is that they're comparing these results, or in other words, they're evaluating, again, the effects of exposing it to lunar soil conditions. And how do they evaluate those? Well, by comparing them to growing them in terrestrial soil. Again, the main purpose. So this is adapted from Herman Melville's novel. And who is Herman Melville? Well, he wrote Moby Dick, but this is a different novel. Okay, so Humphrey Davy was a prominent British chemist and inventor. Years ago, a great American savant. And what's a savant? Like a really smart person, a scholar, a genius, a thinker, something along those lines. A grave, and what does grave mean? Really serious. Okay, so being in London, he observed, and it was observed at an evening party there, a certain... Now, what is this word here? I'm just going to ignore it, because I can't say that I've ever seen that word. And we want to remember that, generally speaking, one word is not going to make or break you on a passage like this. So we still have a serious American scholar or thinker who was Was he observed, or did he observe someone else? I think he observed someone else or something else. He observed a certain fellow, an absurd ribbon in his lapel. That's part of one's garment, lapel. I think that's the pocket on one's jacket, I think. And full of smart banter, whisking about, so sort of moving about, to the admiration of as many as were disposed to admire. Okay, what does that mean? As many people as were sort of, predisposed, in the right mindset, in the right frame of mind, or just there and watching. Okay, so great was the savant's disdain. So the savant, the American here, had a great sense of disdain or dislike, but chancing ere long, we're going to again not even worry about ear, taking a chance to find himself in a corner with another strange word, jackanapes. Don't know that word either, but I think that's referring to the same person there. So we got into conversation with him when he was somewhat ill-prepared for the good sense of the person, but it was altogether thrown aback, or basically surprised, upon subsequently being informed that he was okay. So basically, a surprise meeting or introduction. And then another important thing here would be that this person is, a prominent, as it says here, British chemist and inventor. Okay, so someone had a surprise meeting with Sir Humphrey Davy. So it doesn't explain why one character dislikes another. I don't think it portrays the thoughts of a character who is embarrassed. It doesn't offer a short history of how a person came to be famous. It presents an account of a misunderstanding. Yes. He was altogether thrown aback upon subsequently being informed. So maybe it wasn't really a surprise meeting. It was more that he had met the person and then was later told that this person was Sir Humphrey Davy. Okay. And so what's going on here as we backtrack and look at this again? So this American scholar or savant observed this person being admired and sort of walking around, and maybe walking around as if he were a big deal, but maybe it turns out that, he really was a big deal. Okay. So what would be the takeaway from this one? I think, just to reiterate, sometimes you're going to have some challenging language or words. And the thing is, they can't expect you to know all of these words. And so if you see a really strange word like, coxcombical, I'd have to look that up later, or jackanapes, if that's the right even way to pronounce it. Just try to trudge forward and say, what if I were to just temporarily ignore that word? And chances are you'll be okay. I mean, you don't want to cross out too many words, but as we've seen here, treating the words like blanks is not the worst thing that you can do. You can still get to the answer even if you don't know every word. Okay, main purpose yet again. Studying late 19th and early 20th century artifacts from an agricultural and domestic site in Texas, this archaeologist found that black, capital B, women employed as farm workers utilized hook and eye closures to fasten their clothes at the waist, giving themselves a silhouette similar to the one that was popular in contemporary fashion and typically achieved through more restrictive garments, such as corsets. Okay, so that's a very specific finding. But what is it defining regarding late 19th and early 20th century? So late 1800s, early 1900s. Garments. Okay. Fluellen argues that this sartorial, and that's definitely that's a challenging vocab word. That's not even on my list of vocab words. Sartorial has to do with dress, fashion, clothing. Okay, so this sartorial practice shows that these women balanced hegemonic ideals, and that's another fancy word. Hegemony is dominance in the sense of maybe a cultural sense. So if they talk about male hegemony, males occupying a dominant role over women, something like that. Okay, academics will often you'll see it's very much an academic kind of word or a fancy sounding word, but hegemonic, hegemony. That's the basic idea there. So they balanced hegemonic ideals, the dominant ideals of femininity, with the requirements of their physically demanding occupation. So what would, again, be hegemonic ideals? The ideals that were predominant at the time. So we have a very specific finding and then a claim regarding that finding. So I don't think that this is evaluating a work. But it does offer explanation. Urban fashion ideals. I don't want to eliminate A just yet. But I don't think it's evaluating the work. B, to describe an unexpected discovery that altered a researcher's view of how rapidly fashions change during the period. I don't think we see anything about rapid change, so I think we can eliminate B. C, to summarize the findings of a study that explored factors influencing a fashion practice. I think that, it's what she found, findings, explored factors. What were the factors? The hegemonic ideals of femininity and the requirements of their physically demanding occupation. Are we talking about late 19th and early 20th century Texas? I think that's right, but let's check D. To discuss research that investigated the ways in which these female farm workers used fashion practices to resist traditional gender ideals. I don't think they were resisting traditional gender ideals, because these hegemonic ideals were something that they balanced with these other requirements. So coming back to A, well, the work itself offers explanations for something, but urban fashion idea, yeah. Yeah, but it summarizes the findings. I'm going to say that's going to be C. I've looked at all these before, but it's been at least a month, and so I can't remember the answer, and that's kind of the idea. I don't want to be just going through and remembering the answer, but I'm going to say that that's C, and I'll double check, and if I missed it, I'll come back. The function, so now we're on to the function of individual sentences. The third or underlined sentence here. So the beaver is a keystone species in North America, where it evolved in symbiosis with the aspen tree. So symbiosis, living together and mutually benefiting. So beavers were introduced to Patagonia, a region encompassing the southernmost tip of South America, in 1946, where they encountered an abundance of Nothofagus trees. No idea. I'm just guessing there. A type of southern beech, B-E-E-C-H, so beech, kind of beech tree, not like B-E-A-C-H, go to the beach. Okay. From this, it was discovered that the evolutionary symbiosis that the beaver has with the aspen tree does not preclude or prevent it from forming new relationships with different tree species. So kind of an inference / discovery. I don't know, those two things are not quite the same, but it was discovered from some other encounter. So again, is there something like a cross between an inference and a discovery? Maybe there's a particular word that would encapsulate those, but I'm just going to use the slash there. So within a few years, the beavers had changed the ecosystem by utilizing Nothofagus trees in much the same way they interact with aspens in North America. Okay. Okay, it's a discovery that was made in this context of, seeing what happened after the beavers were introduced to Patagonia. Okay, it's some kind of inference/discovery. I'm going to stick with that. So does it contrast the beavers' relationship? No, I don't think it's contrasting it, because the relationship is comparable more than contrasting. It's similar as opposed to contrasting. It states a generalization that is exemplified. That could work, because the generalization is that this particular form of evolutionary symbiosis does not prevent it from forming new relationships. So that's a generalization. And then the example of Nothofagus trees, is a particular case, that illustrates or, again, exemplifies that generalization. So I think it's going to be B. It describes how it was first introduced to Patagonia. No. It does say in another sentence, and that's something they'll often do with these underlined sentence questions. Function of the underlined sentence. They'll often, as incorrect answers, include things that describe, other sentences in the passage, but we want to make sure we're sticking with the underlined sentence. It doesn't explain why the beaver evolved to form symbiotic relationships. It just says that forming symbiotic relationships with one type of tree doesn't keep it from forming similar types of relationships with other trees. Number 9, in Jane Mansfield's, I think she was a movie star or model actress. In Jane Austen's novel, Mansfield Park, an almost imperceptible or hard to perceive, hard to notice, almost unnoticeable smile from potential suitor, so a suitor, someone who is trying to woo or, win the favor of this other person, I guess. So, but the almost imperceptible smile from potential suitor Henry Crawford causes the protagonist, or sort of main character, Fanny Price, to blush. Her embarrassment grows when she suspects that he is aware of it. So, that describes a particular moment. And we'll have to see what the other sentences are doing to say more about the function in the text as a whole. But it describes a particular moment, this moment, in which Fanny not only infers or sort of makes an educated guess about Henry's mental state through his gestures, but also infers that he is drawing inferences about her mental state, illustrates what literary scholar George Butte calls deep intersubjectivity, so between subjects, a technique for representing interactions between consciousnesses through which Austen's novels derive much of their social and psychological drama. Okay, so we have this general technique that has been identified, and then this particular moment in a particular novel that is an example of that technique. So it gives an example of a technique that is later described. It provides a synopsis, a summary of an interaction, a moment, an interaction in a novel, a moment that illustrates a literary concept discussed in the following sentence. Yes, the literary concept is deep intersubjectivity. So B should be our correct answer here, but let's see. A recurring theme. So C could be tempting, but I wouldn't say that it's a recurring theme so much as it is, again, a technique. And what is the difference between a technique and a theme? Well, a technique is sort of a way of doing something. In this case, a way of kind of illustrating interactions between characters, where a theme would be something like, old age or love, or I don't know, something. A theme is more like a general concept, and so I would not say that this is so much of a theme here. D, it states a claim. No, because there's no example in the following sentence, so that one should be B. Another function of the underlined sentence question. So psychologists have long debated whether bilingualism, two-languageism, being able to speak two languages, has an effect on cognitive development and executive function. So executive function like higher cognition, higher thinking, ability to do things like reasoning, logic, math, etc. Okay, psychologists, have not reached a consensus. They don't have a real shared agreement on, their answer to this question, because different studies have used different criteria, different guidelines, and measures to define and assess bilingualism and its outcomes. Okay, so it's kind of saying why there is no consensus. Well, it's saying that there is no consensus and why. And note that that word because is definitely important. It's as a clue. So linguist so-and-so recently proposed a new framework for conceptualizing and assessing bilingualism, a new framework that takes into account both linguistic, language-related, and cognitive thought-related factors. But this linguist acknowledged that more empirical data, and what is empirical data? That's definitely a word that you want to make sure you know. Empirical means based on observation. That observation could involve experiments, but it doesn't have to. It's just the opposite of, say, theoretical or speculative. So empirical data and validation are needed to test its applicability, how well it actually applies, and how reliable it is. So it sort of highlights a lack of consensus. It sort of highlights a problem within this field relative to this particular question. So the underlined sentence doesn't say anything about Latonen and colleagues. That person doesn't come in until later. It summarizes inconsistencies. That Latonen and colleagues aim to address. Why inconsistencies? Because they use different criteria. So they're not consistent with one another. I think it's a she. I'm not sure. We'll say she, and apologies if that's not a she. Aim to address it by proposing this new framework that would maybe make things more consistent. That sentence doesn't contrast the approach. And no, D is, getting out of sequence. And so, the fact that that person is mentioned, okay, that's relevant, but it doesn't mean that, at the point when we read the underlined sentence, we haven't seen anything about that linguist yet. We haven't seen anything about that researcher, so we don't want to jump the gun and say that it's contrasting this approach or suggesting an implication. No, it's stating a problem that she hoped to address. And I think this is our last one. Yes. So the following text is from Joseph Conrad's 1907 novel. I would have thought that they would have put some spacing in here, but anyway, Mr. Verloc is navigating the London streets on his way to a meeting. I'm not sure where I guess this is where the text starts. Mr. Verloc is navigating the London streets on his way to a meeting. Before reaching Knightsbridge, he took a turn to the left, out of the busy main thoroughfare, street, road. Uproarious, so related to uproar, so basically noisy or loud, with traffic of swaying omnibuses, just buses, and trotting vans, and the almost silent, swift flow of horse-drawn carriages. Okay, so he's navigating a busy street. Under his hat, worn with a slight backward tilt, his hair had been carefully brushed into respectful sleekness. So, it's sleek, it's orderly. For his business was with an embassy. He had business with someone in an embassy. And Mr. Verloc, steady like a rock, a soft kind of rock, marched now along a street which could, with every propriety, be described as private. So it could properly be described as private. Okay, so a lot going on here, but all we need is the underlined phrase, not even a whole sentence. And so a rock, what kind of rock? A soft kind of rock. So it clarifies kind of a comparison. I mean, steady like a rock, we could say that's a simile. Simile. But not just, so it's not just any old rock, but a soft kind of rock. So it's not contrasting him with his surroundings or emphasizing an internal struggle or private opinion. So what on earth do they mean by qualify? So certainly, one could have experiences that qualify that person for a job or a particular role, your qualifications, and certainly that's a meaning of qualifications. But in this context, qualify means something like clarifies, further specifies. I would say that's definitely worth looking up. If you look this up in a dictionary, you will see multiple definitions. But to qualify something is to, again, sort of not hedge, but to clarify, to say, well, it's not just any old kind of rock, but a soft kind of rock. So it's qualifying or clarifying or adding further specification to an earlier description. And so that will be our answer for number 11 here.